Hello everyone, and welcome back to Scary Interesting. What is the closest you've ever come to dying? For those of you who have had an unfortunate brush with death, did you know it was close to the time, or did you only realize it in hindsight? And was it a knowingly dangerous situation, or was it simply an ordinary circumstance that became dangerous without even realizing? In this video, we're going to look at 4 seemingly ordinary situations where what happened to the people involved was horrific. Although the events in this video are fleeting and non-descriptive, they are still highly disturbing, so viewer discretion is strongly advised. In late July of 1985, New Orleans City lifeguards had a reason to feel proud. The long summer season was winding down, and for once, they could look back on it without a single drowning hanging over their heads. And that was no small thing. The people paid to watch swimmers and prevent a tragedy know better than anyone how quickly an ordinary day in the water can become a crisis. That year, however, was different, and in memory, it was the first time they could say the season had been trouble-free. That was also why the annual end-of-summer party felt worth celebrating. Held at the New Orleans Recreation Center, the gathering marked the point when swimming pools were being shut down at 14 of the city's 19 recreation centers. Around 200 people attended the party, and roughly 100 of them were certified lifeguards. It was part tradition, part release valve after months of work in the summer heat, and for the men and women who had spent the season scanning the water for danger, the party was a chance to stop watching for a while. And on the surface, it must have seemed like one of the safest parties in the city. There were 4 lifeguards who remained on duty throughout the event, and about half of the attendees were certified and qualified themselves. If a person had to choose a pool party where nothing could possibly go wrong, a room full of trained lifeguards would probably seem like a pretty good bet. Jerome Moody probably felt that misunderstood sense of safety as a party attendee. Unlike many of the others at the party though, the 31-year-old was not a lifeguard. He was there as a guest, and he didn't even plan to go swimming that night. At about 11 p.m., the party was winding down, and the 4 lifeguards who had been on duty during the event began clearing the pool as the night came to an end. As they did, they noticed the unmistakable figure of a body at the bottom of the deep end. The body was that of Jerome. The lifeguards quickly jumped into the water and worked their way down to the bottom to retrieve him, and as soon as they got his body on the pool deck, they began life-saving efforts. By that point, however, there was nothing they could do, and Jerome could not be revived. Later, an autopsy confirmed that he had drowned, but even with that conclusion, the most basic questions remained unanswered. No one knew exactly how or when Jerome had entered the pool. All anyone knew for certain was that by the time lifeguards found him, he was lying at the bottom of the deep end, fully clothed, at a party that had been held to celebrate a summer without a drowning. Now, if someone drowning at a lifeguard party sounds impossible to you, it might help to know a bit about the process that occurs when someone cannot keep themselves above water. One reason Jerome's death seems so baffling at first is that most people have the wrong idea about what drowning really looks like. The popular image many of us have in our heads is that drowning is loud and dramatic. A person is thrashing wildly, screaming for help, and making it obvious to everyone nearby that something is terribly wrong. That's usually how the movies and TV portray it anyway. Real drowning, though, usually looks nothing like that. In most cases, it's quiet, subtle, and frighteningly easy to miss, even in a crowded pool surrounded by lifeguards. A drowning person usually can't call out for help because the body's first priority is breathing, not speech. If someone is struggling just to get air, there may be no ability to shout even for a second. A drowning victim's mouth may dip below the surface and reappear above only briefly. From the deck, it can look like nothing more than a person bobbing in the water. And the same goes for arm movements. People often imagine drowning victims waving overhead, but that usually doesn't happen either. During what rescuers describe as the instinctive drowning response, a person's arms tend to extend outward and press down on the surface of the water in an effort to keep the body upright and the airway clear. They're instinctively and involuntarily trying to stay above the water, and in that state, they can't control their movements well enough to signal for help in the way people expect. From beginning to end, the whole thing may look strangely undramatic. The person often remains vertical in the water with little or no visible kick, and there may be very little splashing or yelling at all. Unless a trained lifeguard recognizes what is happening and reaches a drowning victim quickly, the struggle on the surface may last only 20 to 60 seconds before they slip under. It's a terrifyingly short window, and to the untrained eye, it may not even register as an emergency. In fact, drownings can often happen in exactly the sort of setting where most people feel at ease. A large share of child drownings in particular take place during family pool gatherings, and in some cases, adults are within a short distance, even watching without realizing the child is actively drowning. People can literally witness the beginning of one and still miss it completely because it does not match the dramatic picture in their heads. That reality frames Jerome's untimely and tragic death in an entirely different way. The irony of drowning at a lifeguard party meant to celebrate a lack of drownings may not be lost on you, but the truth is, it's exactly the kind of setting where drownings occur. October 11th, 1987 was the perfect day for an outdoor get-together in northeast Namibia, and Cobus Slabber was going to take advantage of it. He contacted a few friends of his, and soon enough, several families were enjoying a barbecue on the banks of the Zambezi River near Katima Mulilo, a remote town between Angola, Botswana, and Zimbabwe. Food was on the fire, adults were chatting with one another, and children were laughing and playing. Cobus was the postmaster in the town, and life in that part of the world meant living close to the river and the wildlife that came with it. At some point during the picnic, Cobus noticed a group of women and children playing in the shallow water roughly 25 yards away from where his set of friends had gathered. And feeling like they were flirting with danger, Cobus left the party to warn the women and children. It was no secret that there were crocodiles in these waters, and Cobus didn't want to see something tragic happen to the group. He then made his way over to them and let the women watching the children know that the kids were at risk of being attacked. Just as he finished chatting with the women, as he stood along the riverbank, a crocodile popped out of the water faster than he could react. In a matter of seconds, it lunged from the edge of the water and clamped onto Cobus's ankle. With almost no time for anyone nearby to process what they were seeing, the crocodile began dragging him away, hauling him down the muddy bank toward the river. Witnesses later said he struggled furiously as the animal pulled him closer to the water. He tried to keep his footing and tear himself free before it could fully get him into the river, but once the crocodile got him into the Zambezi, the odds were already horrifyingly against him. Cobus was heard shouting for help as the crocodile took him under. At least twice afterward, he came back to the surface again, still alive and fighting for his life. Each time, however, he was pulled back down, and in mere moments, he was gone. As the light of day faded, a search began along the water, but there was little reason to be optimistic about finding him. By later that night, the effort to recover him had been called off completely, and his body was never found. Crocodile attacks are terrifying in general, but especially in how little time they give a person to react. Large crocodiles in particular can still be incredibly stealthy. In fact, it's an adage in parts of the world where crocodiles coexist with humans that it's the one you don't see that gets you. Crocodiles tend to wait, staying low in the water and striking only when their target is close enough that escape is unlikely. As hunters, their goal is not to chase their prey for very long. Instead, they rely on that first surprise attack and pulling their victim off balance before they can get away. Crocodiles are known for exactly that kind of ambush, and with a powerful thrust from the tail, they can launch themselves through the water and even surge partly onto land in a single motion. And once a crocodile has hold of a limb, the situation almost immediately becomes hopeless. Large crocodiles typically drag a prey into water, but they have every advantage. A victim may surface briefly, as Cobus reportedly did, but each second spent fighting in the river usually favors the crocodile, not the human. On land, a person at least has some chance to wrench themselves free, get help, or even fight from a stable position. But in the water, all that changes. Crocodiles are just too strong and too fast. In much of Africa, deadly crocodile attacks are not freak events in the way they might be viewed elsewhere. They're simply part of the risk that comes with living beside major rivers and wetlands where people and large predators share the same space. The Nile crocodile, found across much of sub-Saharan Africa, is responsible for more fatal attacks on humans than any other crocodile species. It doesn't hunt people exclusively, but because it's large, aggressive, highly capable in the water, and often live in areas where people depend on the river for daily activities, humans become prey by default. Swimming, bathing, washing clothes, collecting water, fishing, or simply standing too close to the bank while warning others can be enough to put someone within striking range. People attacked by crocodiles are often advised to fight as hard as they can, keep their footing if possible, and do everything in their power to avoid being dragged fully into the water. With this in mind, it seems like Cobus did everything the right way to try to save his life, but even then, it didn't matter. Wood chippers are exactly what they sound like. They're machines built to take solid wood and tear it apart. Feed it tree limbs, branches, and chunks of wood, and inside the machine, a heavy set of blades mounted on a rotating drum hacks the material into small chips. In the logging and sawmill world, it's a very useful, even crucial piece of equipment. It helps turn waste into manageable bits, but obviously it does this by using enormous force. And it's that force that makes a wood chipper so dangerous. Commercial machines are designed to grab material and pull it inward with speed, and once something is caught, there is very little time to react. Most people, though, picture the danger as being limited to the blades themselves, but the threat starts before whatever reaches them. The rollers, feed mechanism, and moving parts can seize clothing, gloves, or hand in an instant and drag a worker straight toward the cutting system. Even when that doesn't happen, though, a chipper can still injure or kill in other ways, including by throwing or releasing parts or pieces with violent force. As a result, year after year, wood chippers leave behind a trail of horrific injuries and deaths. Many victims are pulled directly into the machine, while others are struck by components that suddenly give way while the chipper is operating or being worked on. Those aren't the only ways a wood chipper can be dangerous, though. Sometimes it's the force still trapped inside after a machine has been stopped. These machines don't have to be fully running to kill someone, which presents a whole world of risk that workers have to be aware of. A conveyor can shift, a pressurized line can burst, a jammed mechanism can suddenly break loose, or a cable under tension can behave like a whip. During maintenance or troubleshooting, workers often move close to machinery specifically because something has gone wrong, which is exactly when the danger becomes harder to predict. This is why lockout and tagout procedures exist. The whole purpose of these procedures is to make sure that before anyone cleans, repairs, unclogs, or services a machine, all hazardous energy is identified, isolated, and controlled. When that doesn't happen, the injuries are often catastrophic. And this was no more apparent than in an incident that occurred at the Witworth sawmill roughly 100 miles north of Houston. It was lunchtime on Monday, November 21st, 1983, and before 5 workers left the sawmill floor for a break, they ran into a problem with the wood chipper they were working on. They were trying to deal with a jam in the system, which was a common enough occurrence in such settings, but this time things were about to go terribly wrong. Sometime before 12:15 p.m., with the chipper shut down, the men began trying to free a blockage involving wood chips that had become stuck in a part of the machinery known as the shaker. A pipe designed to blow the chips out had also become plugged, and the workers were attempting to clear it by hand. To break up the clog, they used a cable and a stick, punching into the jammed area in hopes of forcing the chips loose. According to accounts of what happened next, the cable they were using became entangled in the pipe as the men worked. Then it went into the other side of the chipper and suddenly lashed back out with a tremendous amount of force. The result was instantaneous and horrific. The cable whipped through the air and struck the group with such force that 4 of the men were killed instantly. 1 man lost his head and 3 others suffered catastrophic head injuries so severe that the tops of their heads were gone above the eyes. Their deaths were attributed to massive trauma, including severed spinal cords and immense blood loss. One of the men killed was the 33-year-old co-owner of the sawmill. A 5th worker, Ruben, survived but was seriously injured. He was taken to a hospital where he was eventually listed in good condition with a broken leg. The horrifying scene was also actually first discovered by Charles's brother, who also worked at the mill. The Witworth sawmill disaster was a gruesome example of 2 industrial dangers colliding at once. The first was the obvious one, which was the brutal power of a wood chipper system built to move and destroy solid material. The second was energy that had not been fully controlled before workers moved in to clear the jam. In this case, the clog created conditions where a cable could become trapped and then violently freed. Once that happened, it became a weapon driven by the machine's own stored force. Commercial laundry facilities began mechanizing in the late 40s and early 50s, but the 90s were the real age of automation and integration. For the average person, places like H&L Linen Service, where Alfredo Castro worked, are the very essence of industrial chaos. The air is thick and sticky, and the smell of bleach and industrial detergents can be downright overwhelming. As for the noise, it generally hovers around 90 decibels. That's like standing next to a gas-powered lawnmower at full throttle or holding a hairdryer just an inch or 2 from your ear. Imagine putting up with that for 8 or 10 hours a day, 5, 6, and sometimes 7 days a week during the busy holiday season. At H&L, smart conveyor belts moved laundry between washers and dryers with very little human intervention. And here's how it worked. First, a conveyor deposited a 100 or 200 pound pile of dirty laundry called a cake into an empty washer. When the cycle ended, the door automatically opened, and fractions of a second later, the drum tilted forward and deposited the cake back onto the conveyor for transport to an empty dryer. The machines were located in 2 distinct rows, a bank of washers on one side facing a bank of dryers on the other, and the space between them was called the wash aisle. As for the washers and dryers themselves, they were massive by home appliance standards. Some of the drums were tall enough to accommodate a man standing upright. The electric drive motors also generated about 4 or 5 horsepower, and with a 10 or 20 to 1 gear reduction, they produced as much torque as a mid-sized car. 31-year-old Alfredo Castro lived in Roxbury, Massachusetts, about 3 miles north of H&L. He and his night shift co-workers were struggling to keep up with the abnormally high flow of dirty laundry on the evening of Wednesday, November 21st, 1990. At 7 p.m., Alfredo was diligently cleaning one of the dryers on the wash aisle. Clearing it was a vital task because it prevented items from getting lost and mixed in with other loads. But more importantly, it prevented napkins, uniforms, and table linens from getting stuck in the crevices between the drums and frames and damaging the machines on the next cycle. At the time, a 100-pound bundle of wet laundry sat on the belt waiting to be deposited into the machine that Alfredo was looking into. In a perfect world, the conveyor would have remained motionless until he moved out of the way, manually reactivated the lockout tagout, which was a switch to bring the temporarily dormant system back online. But that night, something went horribly wrong. It's not clear if it was a software glitch, a faulty sensor, a mechanical malfunction, or whether Alfredo skipped the lockout tagout step before entering the danger zone. Either way, the conveyor kicked on prematurely. It's also worth pointing out that Alfredo was probably wearing ear protection to drown out the 90-decibel roar. In all likelihood, he didn't hear the conveyor motor engage or the OSHA-mandated warning sign that preceded it. Then again though, maybe he did. In industrial settings, many workers succumb to a phenomenon called alarm fatigue. In environments where sirens, alarms, and buzzers go off dozens or hundreds of times a day, the brain eventually tunes them out. Another possibility is that Alfredo heard these critical sounds through his earplugs, but that he thought they were from another conveyor belt somewhere nearby. With all of that in mind, it's not entirely surprising that he stayed focused on the task at hand, clearing the dryer in front of him. Fractions of a second later, the 100-pound heap of wet laundry reached the end of the belt. And when it didn't just flop over into the dryer. Instead, it flew off the end of the conveyor, struck Alfredo in the back, and knocked him into the drum. Meanwhile, the dryer sensors detected the additional weight. And to a smart machine in an integrated system, this meant that the load had been delivered. From there, the door shut, the locking mechanism clicked into place, and the 6-minute drying cycle began. At first, the drum rotated slowly as the clutch engaged, but within a few seconds, it reached its operating speed of about 45 rotations per minute. Alfredo was trapped in the spinning centrifuge with a wet ball of laundry that weighed about 2/3 as much as he did. We can only guess what was going through his mind, but it's safe to say that the panic and horror he felt was nothing short of nightmarish. Of course, he probably would have instinctively screamed at the top of his lungs, but unfortunately, industrial dryers are heavily insulated to prevent heat loss and to produce noise on already loud shop floors. Meanwhile, each turn of the drum battered Alfredo against the machine's vented stainless steel ribs. In a matter of seconds, these repeated blows would have caused catastrophic trauma, including heavy bruising, broken bones, and internal bleeding. Then came the heat as the blower sprang to life and began filling the drum with bone-dry 200 Fahrenheit or 93 Celsius air. To make matters worse, the hot air rushing into the dryer quickly turned the moisture trapped in the laundry into superheated steam, which immediately caused horrific third-degree burns. By then, it would have been nearly impossible for Alfredo to take a normal breath. As for his co-workers just a few feet away, all they heard was a slightly louder than normal thumping coming from the dryer. They were also probably wearing ear protection too, and again, they put up with a loud thumping all day, every day. If there's any bright side to this horrific situation, it's that the human body isn't designed to survive in that environment for very long. Between the shock, the heat, and the mechanical trauma, experts estimate that Alfredo probably lost consciousness in the first 60 to 90 seconds. At about 7:06 p.m., the drum slowed to a halt, the sensor signaled the end of the cycle, and the door opened. Next, the machine tilted forward and dumped the laundry back onto the conveyor to be taken to the folding area. It was only then that Alfredo's coworker saw his battered body, head, arms, and legs protruding from the bloody heap of laundry. By then, there was nothing they could do because he was already dead. Boston police investigators arrived shortly thereafter. Within the hour, they determined that Alfredo's death was an unfortunate industrial accident. And after that, investigators from OSHA picked up where they left off. They investigated for a number of weeks before finally confirming that Alfredo's death was an unfortunate accident. That said, the investigation also uncovered multiple violations and issued a number of citations. First, they found that company management failed to ensure that workers adhered to lockout tagout protocols. If any part of the chain had been manually switched off that night like it should have been, the conveyor wouldn't have been able to move and Alfredo wouldn't have been pushed into or died inside the dryer. OSHA also cited the company for inadequate machine guarding and substandard employee training, all of which apparently led to just a $3,500 penalty. Sadly, Alfredo's death didn't result in sweeping industry-wide reforms. On the other hand though, it did highlight the dangerous gray area that often exists between human layer and automation. With that said though, according to some industry watchdog groups, commercial laundry workers aren't any safer today than they were all the way back in 1990 when 31-year-old Alfredo Castro lost his life in a particularly gruesome fashion. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching, and a special thanks to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon or as a channel member. If you're interested, we offer early access videos that are released roughly a week before the regular YouTube uploads. Also, if you have a story suggestion, feel free to submit it using the form found in the description. Anyways, thanks again, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.